Welcome for our next episode of Upreneur with Jason Ditkofsky from McNeill Signs and Channel Letter USA. Serial entrepreneur. We'll kind of talk about him looking at the franchise world along with being able to do some deals recently and how to build scale and scope in these businesses. Jason, welcome. Happy to have you here, man.
Oh, thanks so much. I thought we weren't calling each other serial entrepreneurs, though.
I don't know where that came from. You got me in it at the beginning of the show.
I literally just said, but really good job pronouncing my last name, so thank
you. We actually just talked about we didn't like the term serial entrepreneurs, and I just dropped it right away. So, as a serial entrepreneur, so to talk a little bit about, we had some conversations in the pre-show, and we talked about you when you moved down here to Florida from Canada, starting to just try to decide on what kind of business you went through. And we have a lot of listeners sitting here going, I want to start my own business. I have an idea. I'm looking at franchises. I've looked at business brokers to buy businesses. And you've seemed to run the gamut in your career of all those above. But talk about the move from up north to Florida and how you started trying to decide on what type of business you were going to go through. What was the process going through in your head and how you actually started it?
Okay. Well, in my previous life, I was actually way cooler. I was living in California. I went to school in San Diego, moved up to LA, wanted to work in the entertainment industry, landed a job at Sony Pictures on the actual Sony studio lot in Culver City. Yeah, it was real cool. We did analytical marketing for new releases. So,
what's analytical marketing?
So basically, we would determine based on certain quantitative metrics how many theaters a movie would open in different markets. So for example, the way you would promote a film and the number of theaters it would be available in would be one in Miami and very different in a place like Salt Lake City, Utah, for example.
Yeah.
So we did all that type of stuff and then worked with the marketing departments accordingly to try to make sure that we didn't overspend or underspend on marketing initiatives.
Gotcha. So you had a career job in Cali and then...
So I thought.
Yeah.
And then I ran into the wall of walls. So I, at the time, was only a Canadian citizen and was working and living the life in Southern California. I thought I was the living version of Ari Gold, or was going to be from Entourage, and it all came crashing down. In 2008, when the recession hit, I went to renew my work visa, and Uncle Sam basically said, "No bueno, man. An American can do this job, and you got to find something else to do, or you have 30 days." To get back home to Canada. And it was November 1st, so the winter was coming, and I'm not a fan of the cold weather, so that was kind of tough, and I had to move back north, and I thought I was going to stay up there in Toronto for the rest of my life. Everything was coming together. I was working for the family, did some side projects as well. In 2012, my stepdad said, "Listen, I'm basically out of the game. Time for you to figure out what you're going to do. You want to get a job, you want to look for a business. I'm willing to help to some degree, but you got to figure it out." So my first thing was I looked around and I said, I'm probably never going to have this type of flexibility ever again. At least I was in my early 30s, I was hoping that I wouldn't. And I said, let's do it. And my grandparents, both sides, had places in South Florida. My parents are snowbirds in Boca, so the quintessential...
Snowbird area.
Snowbird Jewish area, however you want to say it. And so I said, so I have a free place to stay. This is a good start, and I love the warm weather, so why not? And I came down here, and I didn't want to be at the mercy of anyone ever again, so we looked into the investment visa and the E2, and I was actually very surprised of really how little that investment had to be. And so I started working with business brokers, and I probably met with 2 or 3, at least spoke to 2 or 3 a day, and met with a bunch, and a lot of it was crap or things that I never really saw myself doing. And I was approached by a gentleman named Gary Lengel, who today works at Transworld, but at the time was a sales rep for United Franchise Group, based out of West Palm Beach. And he said, "What do you know about signs?" And I said, "I don't know anything about signs. I know that."
So what year was this? When was this?
2012 end or beginning of 2013.
Gotcha.
And
so you just came down here just knowing you wanted to be in business for yourself, start your own business, but weren't sure where to do. And then you just started asking around, you started Googling, whatever.
Yeah, exactly. I just started Googling and I said, wrote literally businesses for sale. And much like real estate agents, there's business brokers. And they have a lot of listings. And what I learned is that Florida despite everyone saying how disorganized and crazy it could be when it comes to business brokerages, is the most organized out of any state in the union.
Interesting.
They actually are the only ones who have their own MLS, but for businesses. It's called the BBF.
Huh.
And there was a lot there, and the guy drove me down the street. It was on US 1 near Yamato. He said, what does every business have in common here? And I said, oh my God, they all have signs. And then I saw dollar signs, and then now I know how much competition there is, but I signed up for my first franchise. I wanted to do a resale as opposed to starting something new. I thought I would have more traction that way and have an established customer base. And so the only one that was available for me at the time was up in Stewart, about 60 miles north. But I said, you know what, let's do it. And I went in, we made an offer, we negotiated back and forth for a couple of weeks. I landed it, applied for the visa, had to fly back to Canada, went to the US consulate. I mean, it was cake.
Yeah.
But I guess
when you're starting a business here, they just want the money here, huh?
Exactly. They rolled out the red carpet. It was approved basically within 5 minutes of meeting them after, because you have to submit your business plan and all your financials prior. Yeah. Answered all their questions, and about a week later, I went back to the consulate with a new stamp in my passport, which was good for 5 years, and I moved down here and got rolling.
So what made you decide to do a franchise then, opposed to just, some mom and pop shop you could buy if you were trying to buy a business?
A lot of it had to do, honestly, at the time with the visa, because they basically said that if it's a recognizable brand or something that has been established and has a proven track record, they feel more comfortable that you're able to sustain a living off of that. But also, not knowing a lot about the industry, I thought having that background and that name brand, however strong it is, and in the sign industry, Signorama and Fast Signs are easily the two strongest. Yeah. It was a good base, and I wasn't treading water on my own.
Yeah. How hard is it to go from the entertainment business, which is a sexy industry, you're in LA, you feel like you're at the pulse of the world when you're in LA and kind of all the trends going through and that, to selling signs?
Especially in Stewart, I mean.
Right.
And I don't think there's video here, but I don't look like the typical Stewart, Florida guy. I mean, the people there are amazing. Yeah. They're so nice and down to earth, but they weren't necessarily buying what I was selling at the beginning. Yeah. And it was difficult because you go to MBA school, you grow up in certain circles, and you think like no one was a sign guy where I grew up. Yep. But I love business. Yeah. And it doesn't matter what I'm selling or what I'm producing. I like putting together deals, and I like growing something. And this was just something else I can grow. And I really saw, as I learned the industry, I really saw how it all comes together and how big it could actually get.
Was there any bad advice you got when you were starting to look at businesses to buy, or even some franchises that like you would give somebody a warning, going, "Hey, this is what people say, but I don't think this is completely accurate or true"?
Yes. Franchises are great, but specific ones only. And what I mean by that is there's zillions of franchise concepts now. All you have to do is pick up a monthly subscription of Upreneur magazine, for example, and they have a whole franchise section. And there's all these franchises that have no brand value. So if I'm not purchasing any brand equity, then what's the point of being franchised?
You're just getting an SOP. You're just getting the operating procedures to be able to run a business, and that's it.
Unless they have a phenomenal business model that or some incredible proprietary software that may not be available to you otherwise, I don't see the value in it, and a lot of them don't really stand by what they're selling in terms of support, is what I've heard.
Okay, that's good feedback. So then you started One Signorama. Did you pick up other franchises? Did you go off kind of on your own? Tell us kind of the progression from that one franchise you had in Stewart to where you're at now.
Well, I picked it up and I did well with it. I mean, the base of where I was starting, I didn't really have that. I couldn't really gone that far down. Yep. But that's kind of the benefit of picking up a resale, is that even though.
How did you fund it? Was it seller finance? Did you find its own, borrowed from the family?
No, I borrowed from family.
Yeah.
But it was also about the same, even cheaper than purchasing a brand new one.
Oh, okay.
Because you don't have all the setup costs. Some of the equipment was older. Yeah. But sometimes, unfortunately, if someone hasn't been successful in it or really didn't put in the time to really want to do it. They just want to get out.
Yep.
And I was able to take advantage of that.
That's awesome.
And same thing happened again. I did well. My first year United Franchise Group, I actually won Rookie of the Year.
Yeah.
And I was approached by another one, and this time it was in Hollywood. So such a different market from Stuart.
Now you got Boca right in between you, between both your places. Yeah.
And I was still living in Boca,
East
Boca. So I picked up Stuart for I picked up Hollywood for a great deal from a family who did okay with it, but just wanted out. It was an older couple, and they were just done with it. They didn't want to be in it anymore. And they actually were the landlords. They owned the building, so it was pretty seamless. And it was the toughest year and a half grind in that market.
Why?
There was a lot of independents in that area who did stuff for cash flow and not necessarily for profit.
Yeah.
So you have a lot of, I noticed that a lot doing business down here, is people do a lot of things that are just counting the revenue, but they don't really count their costs. And I mean, if something's not profitable, there's no point in doing it. So I would quote something where someone would do for like 50% of the price, and I couldn't compete. Yeah. And I said, I'm not grinding like this. And there was a lot of bait and switch that was going on. Like, Jason, I'll do this install for X amount. And they get there, I said X amount, but I really mean Y amount. And if you don't give it to me, it's not happening at all. And at this point,
you're already committed and doing it. And
so
it's true.
I got out and I did really well on that location. I basically was able to sell it for probably market value of what a new one would cost, and I got it for a fraction of that. And another reason I did is because I was trying to scale my location. That's why I wanted multiple locations. And United Franchise Group, they're a great organization, but they have a business model of selling individual units.
Right, you can't go into other people's territories.
You're not supposed to.
Yeah.
And they make their money from collecting their monthly royalties.
Yeah.
And if you're leveraging multiple locations to reduce that amount of royalties, they're not thrilled about it, which I understand. So just wasn't the right fit for what I wanted to accomplish long term.
So before you go into kind of changing to that, you said your first year in the Stuart place, you were rocking and rolling, did really well. Obviously, you were able to extract some value in the second franchise you did. What was it that grind that you did, but it obviously achieved results? Was it, you think you were just good at sales and being able to put deals together? Do you think it was a matter of just out marketing the competition? What was kind of led to your success so quickly that first year in the franchise?
Being humble, but also being confident. So the first thing on day one, I had just done 2 weeks of sign training, and now I'm supposed to run an entire business on its own. So I inherited 2 employees. I'm literally, the first week, I got the designer and production guy gave me his notice because he had already found a new job because he couldn't stand the previous owner and didn't know that someone new was coming in. So we started from scratch there. And I told everyone when I took over their projects that I was new, and I didn't pretend to be the expert, but I also knew that I knew more than them. And so that went a long way, being humble and being truthful and helping people get through everything was one thing. The other thing that really helped is knowing what you're good at and knowing what you're not good at and knowing who you're going to connect with and knowing who you're not going to connect with. So I went to a couple of networking events up in Stuart, and I quickly found that not everyone, it's kind of provincial up there a little bit, and great people, but they like to keep it in their community a lot. And they didn't love the idea that some guy from way up north, or I guess in this case, living in Boca, was going to be their guy. And there was a lot of, my daddy's lived here for years, and you're kind of like a good old boy, or you're not. And so I figured for that type of stuff, I was going to have a sales rep who was definitely a good old boy. But I positioned myself as the opposite of a good old boy. And as more people started moving in there, I said, if you're, someone came in and you're a good old boy, I'm not your guy. But if you feel kind of left out by that, then I am your guy. And it proved to be really successful up there.
Nice. So you started with the sign and rental side. To talk about the pivot on how you started to go off on your own from there.
Well, when I realized that I couldn't scale it and I wasn't going to be able to achieve what I wanted to, I decided to offload them unit by unit. And from there, I didn't really know what I was going to do. And I identified a unique a unique business opportunity. I've been buying channel letters, which is the electrical letters that basically is in every commercial lease, those storefront letters, from a guy in Delray Beach, 2 guys actually, set of partners. And they'd always talked about selling. I said, wow, these guys have a really good business model because there's not that much competition.
Yeah.
There were certainly barriers to entry because of the amount of equipment that you needed.
Yeah.
And there was some competition, but what lacked amongst them and their competition is that if you requested a quote, you didn't get a quote back so quick. If you didn't know every single technical spec about exactly what they were talking about, it kind of put you down a little bit, made you feel less than.
Yeah.
And that was kind of what I got from a lot of the other franchisees.
Yeah.
It's not these people are buying it. Signer-ROMs are typically print shops, and some could do a lot more, but some don't do much more.
Yeah.
And I said, this is a real opportunity to bring this and make everyone feel comfortable. And really, it's not going to be hard. It's going to return phone calls and be polite.
Yeah.
And I went in and I got my butt kicked the first year. I really did. I mean, there were days where I pull like 36 hours straight because I inherited guys who maybe didn't necessarily know what they were doing. I inherited guys who were used to working a certain way and working with, and it was all about not paying certain people the most amount of money versus getting the best people.
Yeah.
And man, it was rough. The first couple of months into it, I was like, did I actually make the right decision? But I tore it down and built it back up. I brought in guys who I knew from the past.
Yep.
I invested in equipment to basically remove the power from a lot of the employees back towards me.
Yep.
And brought in people who were going to learn that equipment and learn my ways. And we really grew it. We had a client concentration problem at the beginning when I first inherited it.
Yep.
And now we're thriving and we're out there. And it's been a huge turnaround the past 3 years.
That's awesome.
Thanks.
That's awesome.
Thank you.
What learnings would you share that you kind of got out of that first year and a half? Like, would it have been things you would have done differently in evaluating the business ahead of time? Do you think you would have pulled the Band-Aid off faster in certain decision making? Where as you look back and reflect, and that acquisition was not ideal, or you kind of debated on if it was the right thing or not. Where do you think you would? Where are the learnings that came from that somebody else can kind of gain from just listening to it?
If something doesn't seem right, it's probably not right.
Right.
It may be right for the previous people who were there, but it may not be right for you.
Yep.
The other thing that I made the mistake of, and I made sure I didn't do it this time around with my most recent acquisition, is when you're taking over employees, don't tell them that nothing's going to change, because that's a lie.
Yep.
Ultimately, something's going to change. Something as little as your managerial style is ultimately going to change. And just because they used to do certain things one way, doesn't mean it's going to be the same way. And it may be, and it doesn't really matter if they're going to like it. You also have to, exert authority right away. Not in a mean way, and not in a way where it's telling them this is just how it's going to go. You want to get their opinions. You want to see what worked well in the past. You want to see what didn't work well, but they have to know at the end of the day you're the decision maker, and you're just going to have to play ball.
Yeah. It's I've taken over a number of operations, and I always say, and I stole this line from somebody, said, you got to paint a picture of hope and optimism while defining reality. And so you got to kind of tell them what they should be excited about and look for, but you can't pull punches on what the reality is, what's good and what's bad, to be able to do it. And I've always found myself anywhere from 2 weeks to 90 days, I go on like a listening tour where I just, depending on how big the operation is I'm taking over, if it's like 2 people and it's like a week or 2, right? But if it's bigger, it might take me 90 days. Where I try to gain a sense of what it is and try not to make any changes except changes that I think will help the culture right away, right? I remember I took over one operation and they had to pay for coffee. And so I got free coffee and they thought it was the greatest thing in the first week. But it wasn't a big expense. But what I found is most people after 3 months, 6 months, a year, depending on the size of it, when they pick up the head at the end of those 3 months or 6 months, they'll realize it's a completely different company, but they might not have realized it right off the bat when you swing and it kind of gave some changes. And that balance between making it clear that you're in charge and they should follow you and there's some direction and you're kind of showing them what the future's going to look like, while also making them feel important and listened to, is a very difficult balance to be able to do. And clearly you were able to do it effectively with being able to turn around, and where you couldn't, you made some changes in the personnel to be able to do it, to kind of to fit what you were looking for going through. So you were able to start to get more on the manufacturing side, not just the retail side. Is kind of what you did. So you started to kind of look up and down the chain and started to kind of pick up some of those the other pieces of the supply chains.
Well, that's all that Channel Letter USA does. Let me just go back to what you said about culture. Establishing the culture is everything.
Yeah.
You can always teach someone how to do something, but you can't teach someone how to think and how to behave and how to act towards others.
Yeah.
And how to act as part of the team.
Yeah.
And so having the right culture and having the right people who fit your culture is the most important thing, and that's what I looked for this time around. In terms of what I moved up and down the value chain.
Before you do that,
sure.
How did you go about looking for it this time around? So was it a matter of just kind of observing day to day? Was it asking different questions? How did you go do it as you kind of got into a couple different acquisitions, or you started to realize you got to start looking for culture? What were some of the things you did to do that?
As soon as it became official that I was going to be acquiring McNeill Signs this time around, before I actually took over, I asked Jay McNeill if I was able to go over there and meet everybody.
Yeah.
And I even had him bring back the people who had been laid off due to COVID.
Yeah.
Because I wanted to meet everybody, because just everyone who fit his ideal of who he wanted to keep might not have necessarily fit mine.
Yeah.
And so I sat down, I spoke with everyone for at least 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And I know you can't get everything in 20 minutes, but I tried to get a good feel from it. And I asked a lot of questions to the employees about the different people there. And because some people get nervous in new situations, some people don't react certain ways. And there was one individual, they all work for me now, but who everyone said, this is the guy. This guy is so important, he's so great. I've never enjoyed working for a manager so much in this period of time. And it was before I even met him. I was like, wow, how often do you pick up an employee where all your other employees say that about it?
Yeah.
That's really special.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Did he meet your expectations after that?
So far he has been. He's been amazing.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So different than me, like complete different managerial style than me.
Yeah.
And we work really well together because I'm so hands off with the guy. He stays in his lane and he brings it and fulfills what he's supposed to do, and that's all you can ask for.
Well, I love it. And even though you had 20 minutes with each of the people, we were talking about different books when we first sat down, but one of the books a long time ago I read was Blank. And the concept of it, though, at least the concept I gathered from it, I could butcher this, but it was with a small snippet of information, you're able to gain a lot. And a lot of times what happened is in that first 20 minutes, you might know in 3 to 5 minutes about this person. The rest of the time is just trying to verify your gut feel after that, right? It's like, all right, I feel the culture's good, and now you're just trying 95% of your time is just verifying how you feel is accurate. And usually it's a pretty good feel. You can get that quickly. So I think some people hesitate, to saying is 20 minutes enough to really get to know somebody, or, if I just shook hands with, this many people and got, enough talking, 5 minutes, 8 minutes, people, can I get a sense of it? Scientifically, people say you can actually gauge a decent amount from those first meetings to do it, and clearly you were able to with this acquisition. Let's talk about the McNeill deal first, because it's an interesting thing, because you did it during COVID, which is abnormal. And so I'd like to backtrack a little bit about this transaction, because leading up to this, you're doing smaller deals with like the franchises and the retail side and that, and then you started to go with Channel Letters a little bit more into some of the support. But let's talk particularly about the McNeill one. How'd you find a deal like this in COVID, and what made you have the gumption to go do a deal right now with so much uncertainty? So kind of walk me through where your head was with this.
Okay, well, I'm a firm believer that you gain your advantages in the littlest places. So forever, I always have the Transworld business listing sent to me every week, regardless.
Yeah.
And a lot of the times, if I see anything with signs, I fill out the non-disclosure, and I hear from my broker, and I get the information, and most of the time it has no interest to me. Sometimes it piques my interest, and we'll arrange a phone call, and the majority of the time it turns into nothing beyond that. But I did it this time, and I saw McNeill Signs. And I did a double take because they're one of the biggest in South Florida, if not the biggest, right up there. And I said, is this the same McNeill signs in Pompano Beach? And she goes, yes.
Yeah.
I said, are you serious? And I said, okay, I want to meet him. And she's like, but it's a different type of deal. The building is sold. They're auctioning off their stuff. It's just for the contract. I said, I want to meet him. She goes, but they just want you to bid on the contract. I said, I want to meet Jay McNeill.
Yeah.
And so she made it happen. And we met and we spoke for probably about an hour and a half. And I said, this is a guy who gets it. He cared so much about his employees. I mean, when he was so concerned about it, like literally the thought of him closing up was brought a tear to his eye, not just because of what it meant, the legacy meant to his family, but literally about some of these employees have been with him for 25 years.
Wow. And
he didn't know what was going to happen to them, and it really bothered him. And I was taken by that. And we kind of walked through. So a lot of the stuff he was doing before, he was doing everything but fabricating. So he was outsourcing the fabrication. And that's all Channel Letter USA did, was fabrication.
Yeah.
And he did the installations and the service. And basically I did everything but installation and service.
Yeah. So it was a great fit.
It was a great fit.
Yeah.
And I knew that, I can't go into the details of the terms number-wise, but I knew that, it would be like a guppy trying to eat a whale for this to work. And I went back and I came up with a concept and floated by him, and the broker was like, maybe this will work and maybe this won't, but I said, listen, it's worth a shot.
Yeah.
And there was a few days later I got a response that he wanted to come see the operation. And it was very serendipitous because a few months prior, Channel Letter USA had grown and an amazing space in my business part in Delray had become available.
Yeah.
And someone had moved out overnight because of COVID.
Yeah.
It was the perfect space, and I upgraded my space and signed the lease. And all of a sudden, I had room to take on this bigger venture.
It's awesome.
And
so were you always planning on doing a deal? Because you're getting all these things from Transworld every week. Is it like you knew and you just had some stuff on the side, or you were just like, you know what, something comes up, I'm going to figure out how to make it work?
It's not only that. I just sometimes the lay of the land, because I'm wholesale. Yeah. It's good to know where one of my big customers looking to sell and getting out.
Yeah. So it's more just knowing what's in the competitive landscape. It wasn't like you were trying to do a deal.
It's such an easy piece of information to get.
Yep.
That's something that takes like maybe 1 minute a week just to peruse through something.
Yeah.
It gives you all the information. It gives you the pulse of your industry.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
So it fell into it. Was I planning on? I always wanted to build something more in terms of business. Was it going to be another sign business? I don't know.
Right.
I always looking to grow and seize opportunities.
Yeah.
I have a higher risk tolerance than definitely than most of my family. A little stomach hurt. Their stomach hurts sometimes when I tell them about it. But when you see your opportunity, I don't want to go back there and say what if. So I gave an offer based on the terms that would have been comfortable for me.
Yeah.
And my opinion was, if it works out, I'll figure it out.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't, so be it. And something else will come up eventually.
Yeah.
It worked out.
That's awesome.
Congratulations. Thank you.
Congratulations. I know it's not an easy thing to do during uncertain times. And the good part is everybody needs signs in the business. When are they going to upgrade them? When are they going to do them there? So I guess it's a relatively recession-proof business, but it still takes a lot of gumption to be able to go do a deal like this. So talk about this. Was the integration of McNeill signs much different than the integrations of other businesses, or was it just same thing on a bigger scale?
Well, it was the first time that I was combining two businesses.
Yep.
So in the past, I would buy something, I would sell something, but I was never bringing one group into another group. The good part is there was very little overlap.
Yep.
So instead of having just a fabrication company, we now have my Channel Letter USA is just the fabricators for both companies.
Gotcha.
So we build for the other sign company still,
yep.
and we build for McNeill as well.
Gotcha.
So all these other people, we didn't have designers before because we didn't need to, because
yep.
they would send us the files ready to go.
Yep.
We didn't have installers, we didn't have service. I was the sales team.
Yeah.
And now we have a full team. So now my old company still stands on its own, but also became a department of Channel Letter USA, but everyone's been really professional. Everyone's integrated really well together for the most part. There's always some that drag their feet a little bit, or some who just aren't meant to be, but That's part of anything.
Yeah, that's any adoption of change.
It's been really, really, and I brought in a few new faces too, just to sweeten the pot a little bit.
Yeah.
It's been really as seamless as it could possibly get. And a lot of that also has to do with Jay McNeill.
Yeah.
He still has stayed on in an advisory role. He still runs his location up in Flagler County.
Yeah.
And we have a great relationship. He doesn't see it as me versus him. We work in tandem on a lot of things, and he's been quite the mentor the past couple of months, and is going to continue to be so, hopefully.
Well, but that's how it's business. I mean, it's nice to be able to have that. You know, if for somebody just to walk away, probably would have been detrimental to the business. To be able, the fact that he's willing to be engaged, and it might have been part of the deal anyway to help you kind of go through it. But I think it's a smart move to do it. A couple last questions and kind of pivoting away from the deal and the transition. If you had to think of one of your favorite failures that you had in your career, one that in hindsight you learned a lot from, whether it was in the businesses we're talking about, whether it was previous careers or whatever it is, but is there a certain favorite failure you had for yourself?
Yeah, I had a business venture with a friend, and I guess the best way I could put it is sunk costs. Sometimes, often, people chase good money and good time after bad money and bad time. And
elaborate on that.
Well, we got into this opportunity together, and he was doing something really amazing, really unique, and he wanted someone to try to monetize and take advantage of what he was working on.
Yep.
And so we did it, and I took a lot of risk and put a lot of time into it, and the guy didn't really come in on his end at the end.
Yeah.
And rather than, on one hand, it took a long time for him to just come out and admit that he wasn't necessarily able to pull off as much as he thought he was able to.
Yeah.
But really on my end is I didn't want to believe it. I wanted to say, no, it's going to come together. It's going to work out. And I wasted a lot of good time.
Yeah.
A lot of negative energy, feeling bad about it.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't chase that again. Sometimes you have to know when to cut something loose.
Yeah.
And that would be my big failure in that department, and I've learned a lot from that.
And when you say I just want to kind of explore. So you had a good, what seemed like a good business concept. You had what you felt was a good partner on that to be able to do it. But as you started to realize that maybe you were willing to put more into it than your partner was, or just kind of wasn't working out where it was, you would have got out earlier than dragging along.
I should have, and because it would have done. We've salvaged the friendship since.
That's
so
awesome.
yeah,
Okay,
absolutely.
yeah.
It takes and it took both people to put stuff aside, but. I don't know about not getting into business with friends. Some people say that. I don't know if that's necessarily true. But I think when you do that, you have to be able to be real with each other. And my bad was not calling him out, maybe in fear of having that friendship lost. Whereas I should have just said, hey man, listen, this isn't working out. And you do you do, I'll do me, and we're all good. And instead it built up resentment, and I wish I could take that time back. Because it was, even though it was probably about a couple of months of waste of time, maybe 8 months of wasted time, it was a tough 8 months, and I wish I didn't feel that way.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. All right, so then on the flip side of that, can you share your most memorable day in your career?
Man, there's so many.
Yeah, and maybe it was landing a certain deal. Maybe it was a matter of, you saw a pivotal spot in your career. Maybe it was just a certain sale, or maybe it was just you figured, hey, this is what I'm into, or maybe it's just a unique story. I know we talked in the past. You did some work as an intern with WWE, which used to be WWF, or you were in LA for a while. So, but any part of your career where you're like, this was just an interesting, memorable, inspiring part of your career that you kind of look back at.
I know this is going to sound corny, but there's not one moment. Mm-hmm. There was a lot of them, and the many moments kind of reflect. I was able to achieve a lot of things because I just put my head down and went for it.
Yep.
It would have been very easy to say, crap, I had to leave California, and now I'm back in Canada, and I'm not going to be able to live somewhere warm or do.
Yep.
And I just said, you know what, I'm going to figure out a way. I never would. Same thing with landing at WWF. Same thing with landing at Sony.
Yeah.
These are things that I wanted, and I chased them. And people said, "Oh, it's ridiculous. How many people don't get that?" And I was an average student.
Yeah.
I worked hard in graduate school, but in undergrad, I definitely skated by.
I graduated with a 2.6. So, you know, I'm like, it's like telling people you can still do all right.
You can, and you just got to put it down, and you just got to go for it. I hate the word grind because it doesn't mean you're working 18-hour days. It just means that you're being smart and you're going after what you want to go after. And so all these things happened because I just went for it. And I'm sure a lot of things did it. Not everything works out in my life. Okay, you know, it's not like I'm just the golden child, everything works out. Far from it. But I also go for a lot of things where people make excuses for themselves that they can't, or they won't, or they shouldn't. They come up with every reason to kind of self-sabotage. Yeah. And I just go for it, man. Yeah, no, and I think
if you look at how success leaves clues, you'll see a lot of successful people say similar things that you said, right? It's like, you know, I've decided I'm going to do it. The hardest decision is deciding you're going to go after it. Then at that part, it's just conspiring the world with you to be able to figure out how to make it happen. Whether it's, you know, when I'm coaching people about doing interviews or something like that, I'm like, you know, send a handwritten thank you note afterwards on that part. Then send an email afterwards with the top 10 reasons that employer should hire you. And it's just these little steps that you do that kind of tilt everything into your favor. And most successful people, they make a decision and then they start thinking of these little things that are going to keep tilting things in their favor. And if you do enough of those little things, usually it'll start to put it over to the way that you want it. And if it doesn't, usually someone with an attitude like yourself will figure out some learnings from it to make sure next time it works, and don't really look at it as a negative. You probably don't even remember the times where you really tried to conspire on stuff to work and then it didn't really happen because you went and figured something else out and you found another passion to be able to go through to get it right.
Exactly. Like every step forward doesn't necessarily take you to where you ultimately want to end up, but it takes you somewhere that forces you to take another step. So even if you do something you fall flat on your face and you completely fail, well, you got to get up and move somewhere, and that next place that you go to may be ultimately where it ends up working out well for you. And so as long as you keep moving and you don't get frozen and you go after what you want, you may end up finding something completely different. But if you don't start moving, you're just paralyzed in that one spot, nothing's going to come to you.
That's it, man. You need the inertia. You need to keep that grind. Let's use the word grind, but that movement forward. As long as the movement's happening, things will start to do it. It's when people get paralyzed or stop is where they don't end up getting what they want. And I think that's a great way to end it, man. I appreciate the conversation, dude. This is fun.
Yeah, a ton of fun. Thanks so much for having me. It was awesome.
Yeah, glad you're here, man.
Thanks.
Thank you for watching the Upreneur podcast. And don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe. And share this with anybody who you think needs to hear it.